Welcome back to the Brewer Fanatic podcast. Happy New Year, by the way, as well. Our first show of 2025 will continue looking ahead to the season that is now starting to draw a little bit closer for the Brewers. We're into the new year. Pitchers and catchers are going to be reporting in less than 2 months now. But before we dive into all of that, first of all, Spencer, this is the first time I've talked to you somewhat face to face in the new year. How are things going for you?
Good. I very much enjoyed my week and a half off of work and got to spend time with some family that I don't get to see too often over the holidays. So it was good. It was relaxing. I needed that. Now I'm reset. Now it's 2025. We got our own baseball stuff coming up. We've got Brewers baseball coming up. We've got questions about the draft today. So we're jumping all the way into July on some of these. I'm full blown baseball mode now that we've hit 2025. So I'm doing well. How about you?
Can't complain. I enjoyed the holiday as well. Got to see some friends and family. I went to a wedding last Saturday, so I got to catch up with some people who I hadn't seen in a few years. It was also just a very surreal experience, too. I'm going to make some people feel old probably, but this is the first time that I went to a friend's wedding because now I'm at that age, and that's going to continue for the next couple of
I was
years.
going to say, get used to it.
Of an era, but no, the last week or so has been pretty good for me as well on that front of being in full baseball mode now. This is usually the time of year where I just can't take it anymore. Like the break is nice for maybe the first month, even 2 months after the season ends, because the baseball season is a long season. But once we start getting into late December, especially January when the calendar flips over, I don't really know what to do with myself anymore without having baseball games to go to almost every day and baseball games to watch almost every day. I told you this a few nights ago. It's at the point where, like, every few nights I'm having baseball themed dreams that usually involve me doing my job in some capacity. So I think that's a sign that we're ready for things to pick up here a little bit. And things have not picked up over the holiday week, but that's kind of to be expected. So we will touch on a couple of topics, but otherwise, a lot of this show is going to be answering some listener questions. We got a lot of them this week, and we're going to try to get through almost all of them if we can. First, we'll start with the main piece of news. I guess if you really want to call this actual news, this is probably the only actual news that broke recently, and it broke earlier this week. The Brewers are still going to be on FanDuel Sports Network in 2025. That's the now rebranded version of Bally Sports, and that sounds disgusting to say that. I hate that we're now in an era where the networks that you're watching your team on are named after sports betting companies. If you bet on sports, like I don't care really, do whatever you want, but just the to have that thrown in my face like that and to just see not even like an embrace of this, but almost like the fact that it's now being pushed into every single broadcast of a sporting event, promotion of a sporting event. It just seems really gross and slimy, and I don't like it at all. But the Brewers going back on the initial plan for 2025 and beyond, which was to have Major League Baseball take over a lot of the production, that would give the Brewers some more flexibility with how they wanted to do things, but MLB would be helping out with producing broadcasts. MLB would be responsible for distributing broadcasts. Under this arrangement, the Brewers essentially would have had their own MLB.TV package. It would have been a Brewers TV type deal. MLB has done this before for a couple of teams, the Padres. They've done it for the Arizona Diamondbacks as well. So not something unheard of. More teams are probably still going to end up going to this model down the line. Rick Schlesinger actually said that it's still probably something that's on the table for 2026 and beyond. So it sounds like this is just a 1-year kind of patchwork agreement. But Spencer, I'll get your thoughts on this as well. But the main takeaway here for fans is, number one, nothing is changing about how you're going to be watching the Brewers in 2025. So it's the same as it's been for the last several years now, which is not great for a lot of people. Bally, now FanDuel Sports Network. I don't like saying that, and I feel bad for some of the broadcasters who are going to have to say that now when they're on the air, because again, it just doesn't sound good to me. But that's my 2 cents. I'll be quiet now. The way that you're going to watch the Brewers is not super accessible to a lot of people, like I said, because Diamond Sports group, which is the owner of these regional networks, they do not have a lot of agreements with a lot of cable companies. So you're kind of on a narrow set of options if you're watching through cable, how you're going to be able to watch the Brewers. If you have Spectrum, you can watch them, I believe, DirecTV as well. And then there's like one or two TV streaming services. I think they're on Fubo or something. I don't know all the details of that, but basically everything is going to be exactly the same. So either you can watch on those cable or streaming packages if you have been able to do that before. That's still going to be the case. If you haven't, that's still going to be the case as well. Nothing changing there. Or you can buy a subscription through FanDuel Sports Network that lets you watch or stream the network directly through their own platform. And their platform sucks. But I know I was talking to someone who said it's been a little better. Maybe that was you. You said it's been a little better for Bucks games since FanDuel kind of took over the branding.
Yeah, a little better. I won't give them too much credit, but I haven't been getting kicked out of the app like I used to. So for me, that's a pretty big plus.
Guess you can't complain about that. This is how far the bar has dropped, though. But
Yep.
basically, again, that's going to be exactly the same. Nothing changing. The format of the broadcast will be exactly the same. You're going to have the 30-minute pre and post games. All of those broadcasters are coming back. The broadcasters were never going to be impacted by any of these arrangements because, Sophia Minert, Brian Anderson, Bill Schroeder, Vinny Rottino, Tim Dillard, all of those guys, Jeff Levering as well, all of those guys and the radio broadcasters too, they're all employed by the Brewers. They're not employed by these networks. So no matter who the Brewers were going to be with as their carrier, so to speak, for 2025, all of these people remained under contract with the Brewers. They weren't going anywhere. But again, now you're just going to be seeing them in exactly the same format. The pre and post game shows, Vinny Rottino, Tim Dillard, Stephen Watson, Craig Kashawn, those guys are all going to be just doing their shows as usual. And that's the viewership aspect of it. So nothing really changing there. And kind of depending on what your situation is, maybe that's good news for you, or maybe it's now you're feeling like you're back to square one. Because the advantage of the MLB route was always going to be the accessibility of it.
Yeah.
The Brewers just having a little more control, MLB having more control, being able to eliminate blackouts. That's the other element of this as well. If you're trying to stream the Brewers on MLB TV, you could only do so still if you're out of market. And the reason that is because when these regional sports networks have these agreements to televise these games, that is an exclusive agreement. So that means MLB cannot legally stream these games on their platform in that team's region, because if you're in that region, you can watch them on this cable network. And that's creating competition that is essentially outlawed by these agreements because they're exclusive deals, exclusive rights to stream these games. But again, select spring training games will be broadcast on FanDuel Sports Network. Every regular season game not covered by a national outlet or a national streaming service. Any game that is not a game where any of those platforms or any of those companies have exclusive national rights to those games. So again, everything basically staying the same there. But looking at kind of how this impacts the Brewers, I think is probably the part to dive into even more, because I kind of just used a lot of words to explain that everything's staying the same for the fans trying to watch this. But it really doesn't take a genius to read into this and surmise that this is most likely about finances and about how tough of a spot that MLB arrangement would have put the Brewers in financially, already likely had put the Brewers in financially. So I said the benefit to going with MLB was the accessibility of it, the flexibility, the added control that the Brewers would have over their own broadcasts, and the ability potentially under that arrangement to add some more side programming to their own platform through MLB, through their own cable channel through MLB, things like that. But the downside was always going to be the loss of the money that the Brewers would receive as part of that TV rights agreement with Diamond Sports Group. And Mark Atanasio and Rick Schlesinger talked to us at the end of the regular season, right before the playoffs started. And this came up, and they both downplayed pretty heavily the impact that this was going to have on the team's finances. They talked about, well, our revenue has been about as good as it's ever been this year, that being in 2024. And they pointed to the fact that the Brewers have other revenue sources, ticket sales, merchandise sales, ballpark concession sales, revenue sharing, the revenue sharing agreement across all MLB teams, different things like that. But the reality is, no matter how much they wanted to downplay this or act like it wasn't going to be a big deal, the reality always was that losing a major revenue stream was going to put the Brewers in a tight spot financially because they just don't play on the same financial level as other markets. They just don't make the same amount of money. Every baseball team makes a lot of money, but there are also baseball teams that make a lot more money than other baseball teams. I'm not going to dive into the whole financial landscape of the game because number one, I'm not a 100% grade A expert on this, so I'm not going to go super in depth on something that is not my area of expertise, but I do know the basics of it. And the Brewers just are not able to swim in that kind of pool as some other teams. And not to get too far on a tangent here, but I think people also fail to realize that your payroll is not the only expense you have as a major league organization. So when people pull up these charts about revenue versus revenue spent on payroll, well, of course you're not going to spend the majority of your revenue on payroll because your payroll is not the majority of the costs that you are incurring to run a major league team. There's a lot more that goes into it. Again, I have no idea what the actual numbers are or what the actual percentages are, but just using a little bit of common sense, that's something you need to keep in mind. But again, to get back to my point here, everybody's tight-lipped about how much money they get from these regional sports networks, but we do know that it's a pretty major source of revenue for these big market teams. The figures that have leaked or the guesses that have leaked have always put the Brewers, if not at the very bottom, in that bottom tier, well below big market teams. But still, that's a pretty big source of money for them. And to be losing all of that under the MLB arrangement, that's going to put you in a tight spot financially. I think it was part of the reason why the Brewers really have not done anything this off season. It's been a very quiet one, which was to be expected. We've talked about that before leading into the off season, how we didn't really expect any big additions or even big moves really outside of, maybe a somewhat surprise trade of an outfielder to maybe kind of shake some things up or free up some spots or give them some more flexibility at other positions. But the Brewers have only signed one free agent to a big league deal. That was Grant Wolfram, who we talked about on our last episode. But the bottom line now is the Brewers are getting some kind of cost certainty back from Diamond Sports Group. And I really think that's what this comes down to. The chances are this deal is probably not in the same stratosphere as what their previous one was. So they're probably still losing money on that front. The Cardinals re-upped with Diamond a while back, and their ownership was pretty straightforward that they were not getting nearly the same amount of revenue from that under this new deal as they would have under the past one. But obviously the Brewers just kind of putting two and two together. Obviously this is the one that just gave them more financial stability. So this is probably why they went back this route, why they re-upped with the Diamond Sports Group. So again, that's kind of the financials behind it, how it impacts the Brewers. And then as far as being able to watch things yourself, nothing's really changing. The only change there is that I forgot to bring up a few minutes ago is you can now also buy an add-on subscription through Amazon Prime Video, and you can stream the Brewers that way as well. But again, you need to be in the Brewers market to do that. Otherwise, your option for streaming would be MLB TV. So again, nothing really changing. The only thing that is changing is there's now that one more package you can buy through a different streaming service, and that's based on that previously reported agreement that Amazon had with Diamond a while back to potentially make something like that happen. But that was kind of a long-winded explanation of the whole thing. Spencer, do you have anything to add on just maybe how this whole thing unfolds from your perspective, being someone who is most likely going to be watching 90% of the games on TV, or just kind of your guess or your understanding of what this could mean for the Brewers on the money side as far as their revenue goes?
Yeah, I guess from the viewing perspective first, as somebody who obviously has FanDuel, I was going to say Bally there, but FanDuel for Bucks games right now. I mean, there is a decent chunk of the season, month or so, that will overlap. So I was kind of thinking ahead and going, oh no, I'm going to have to pay for this service and the Brewers' new service to be able to watch their games when it comes to that time. I guess now I don't have to do that, so I don't have to double up on them. But I also paid for a year, now that I think about it, of FanDuel. So I really would have been paying twice if I had to do it that way, if they had gone that direction. So I guess from that perspective, maybe some people will, it might be a little better for some people just in terms of, hit to the wallet. But yeah, I think the production would have been more enjoyable on MLB's side, just based on what I've heard from what Diamondbacks fans have said about it. Even some Padres fans. I know a couple Padres fans who live in that area now, and they said like it's a higher quality broadcast than what you got from these regional networks. But either way, I think the main point is, for the most part, it's been fine the last few years, and it's staying the same. Hopefully, there will be an agreement in the future where the Brewers can have a higher quality broadcast and get a little bit more money. But for now, I think it's absolutely, like you said, it's a financial decision. I would imagine I I have so many different thoughts on this because I was curious when it first happened. I was like, I wonder if they're like legitimately feeling like they need money right now to be able to go make any sort of move, or if they're just looking ahead and going, we really would like to have what they always talk about. They always say we have flexibility to make a move at the deadline or if needed during the season. I almost wonder if this is more for that, where they're just trying to make sure they do have that guaranteed income coming in that gives them the flexibility later in the season, not necessarily even in the off season. But if they are already, again, we don't know where they're at right now, but let's say they are up against their budget already, then they were probably kind of looking ahead and going, we're not going to have any wiggle room as we get into the season if we don't add something that's more certain here. So I'm curious if that's what they were doing. I'm curious if it is a matter of they're starting to get to that point in the offseason where there's probably going to be a few guys who have to take 1-year deals that the Brewers have been known to jump on, that they like to try and take a shot at. And it's getting to that point. You're starting to see some guys who I think were looking for long-term deals are probably going to have to settle for shorter ones. That's where the Brewers like to jump. So maybe they figured, all right, we got to find some room in the budget so that we can actually go after some of these guys, somebody that we would like to play third base or second base or short and maneuver the infield around them. So it is interesting. I don't know what really drove the decision at this very moment. But it is interesting that it just all of a sudden happened randomly on New Year's, like out of nowhere. There was really it sounded like the MLB package was what was happening. Like there was really no thought. I didn't even think FanDuel was on the table at this point, but clearly they'd been working on something behind the scenes. And yeah, I think overall, I would pretty much echo what you said. It's the main point is that nothing changes for the viewers from what we've had the last few years. And from the Brewers' perspective, I think they just wanted more certain income coming in, more certain revenue, and how they plan to use that, I have no idea. I'm sure it'll be at some point it will come into the equation, but I have no idea when that's going to happen.
We got a lot of questions this week, but I was a little surprised we didn't get one about
Me too.
what this deal means for the Brewers financially and what kind of impact it could have. But that is kind of one of the natural questions that extends from this whole thing. You talked about wiggle room. I think that's exactly what it is. So if you're talking about wiggle room now or wiggle room down the stretch, I think it can be a both and because those are basically connected. If the Brewers could be in a spot right now where maybe it was that they felt they didn't have the wiggle room for middle of the season. They felt they had enough right now to maybe add one more. But if you feel like you're not going to have that wiggle room after one more addition, do you really have that wiggle room to begin with? Are they going to want to give that up right now? So I think that this kind of alleviates that a little bit. I think the easiest way to sum it up, and I believe the way I summed it up when I did a really quick write-up of this at Brewer Fanatic was, this is not going to change the outlook of the team, the outlook of the offseason or what the Brewers do. But I do think this is impactful. I think this is what, like you talked about, now enables them to make, that 1-year signing for, maybe anywhere in that 3 to 10 million range. I think that if you got even like a halfway decent deal from Diamond here compared to what it was before, I think that kind of gives you that wiggle room now to do that. And now you have the ability to make that one more move, not a huge move, but maybe one more of those middle tier type moves. So I think we're going to see the Brewers turn around and use some of that cost certainty that they got from that deal. But that's really what it comes down to more than anything. I think that's why they circled back around. Again, we're speculating, but just reading between the lines and kind of looking at this with what we know about the way these things work, it really does seem like this was just the MLB arrangement was not the most financially viable. So if there was a way to go back to Diamond and get a little more cost certainty, which apparently there was, that was something that evidently the Brewers seemed to prefer. So that's enough about that. Talking about the broadcast and business side of baseball, that's not something I enjoy talking about. So let's move on from that. Kurt Hogue of the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel reported earlier this week that Wade Miley is planning to pitch in 2025. He talked to Miley over the phone for a story, and Miley also made clear that he wants to be back in Milwaukee for 2025. None of this surprises me whatsoever. Spencer, I'm guessing you kind of feel similarly as well. I'll let you take the lead on this one first.
Yeah, it definitely isn't a surprise. I think the fact that he kind of pointed out he'd even take a minor league deal to do it was a little bit of a surprise, just from a negotiation standpoint, to throw that out there for somebody who obviously has at least a little bit of power behind him. I mean, this is a guy who every time he's been healthy, since 2018, really, he's performed. But it definitely does not surprise me. I mean, this has always been a very, very good fit, just with his personality in Milwaukee. It's a good fit. His personality with the clubhouse, I think he meshes really well with the pitching people there, the pitching staff, and Murph. I think he's a big fan of Murph from what we've heard from him. So yeah, it's not a surprise that he would want to come back. I think for me, especially if he's willing to take a minor league deal, I think that's an easy yes. I mean, this is a guy who, even if he doesn't pitch for the Brewers, we've heard all about what he does in terms of helping the young pitchers and just being a leader, and how he has at least some interest of being a coach. And while he's been with the team and injured, he's basically been acting as an extra coach at times. So even if that ends up in Nashville, that could even be more helpful to the Brewers, because they have a lot of young pitchers in Nashville this next season, with Logan Henderson, Jacob Mizorowski, Carlos Rodriguez, all these guys who are either just got their feet wet in MLB or they're going to be doing that this next season. A guy like Wade Miley being around those guys with his experience and everything he's been through, there's no negative there. So for me, it's, if that's legitimately on the table and he's willing to take a minor league deal over pretty much any offer he's getting from anyone else, I don't care if he pitches or not. I'm offering him that minor league deal and getting him back into the organization in some form or fashion. I don't think there's really any reason not to, but maybe I'm missing something, Jack. I don't know if there would be anything on your end that you can think of, but yeah, for me, it'd be an easy yes, and definitely no surprise from his perspective that he would like to stay with the Brewers.
To me, this was always a matter of, and now this is even more the case now that he's come out and said this publicly. It was always a matter of when this is going to happen, not if. I never really believed Wade Miley was going to pitch anywhere else, if he was going to pitch again, just kind of from the vibe you get, like you talked about, with how ingrained he is in this organization, with how many people like him, how many people he likes in the Brewers system, the relationships that he has. But I had known for a couple months now that there are people within the Brewers organization who want to bring him back. They want other members of the front office to get on that and try to get him back in some capacity. So knowing that, I always kind of figured this is going to happen. In fact, I'll just say it right now. I'm not going to say 100% because you can never guarantee anything, but I'm like 99.99% sure Wade Miley is going to sign another deal with the Brewers, whether it is a big league deal or a minor league deal. I don't think he really cares. This is a guy who's at the stage of his career where he doesn't need to make more money. He's probably got 1, maybe 2 seasons left if he is able to come back. At this point in his life and in his career, usually for a guy who has already made his money, has already accomplished a lot at the big league level. It is going to be way more about fit at this point and being in the most comfortable environment for yourself, for your family, all of these things, and just being in a spot where you're playing the game because you enjoy playing the game. And Wade Miley enjoys pitching here seemingly more than anywhere else he's ever pitched before. So I don't think he cares about how much the Brewers are able to give them. I think he, just from a representation standpoint, I'm sure his representation wants to get him the best offer possible. But again, I don't think he really cares about that. And that's why he has no problem saying, if it takes a minor league deal, I'll sign the minor league deal, maybe throw some incentives on there once he's able to crack the big league roster again, if he's able to crack the big league roster again. But yeah, none of this is surprising to me. And like I said, I personally believe that Wade Miley is going to be back in the Brewers organization in some capacity. It's a matter of when, not if, and kind of just getting the T's crossed and the I's dotted and whatnot. So I think there's a very good chance that we see him again with the Brewers, but time will tell. This isn't necessarily as prominent of news. This is a little bit more on the rumor mill, but it is hot stove season, so we can talk about rumors once in a while here, especially because it has been kind of a slow couple news weeks over the holiday. Will Salmon and Katie Wu at The Athletic. Will Salmon, if you remember him, he used to be the Brewers beat writer, but he does a lot of Mets coverage and national stuff now for The Athletic as well. He and Katie Wu talked about how the Brewers are among at least 5 teams that are interested in starting pitcher Kyle Hart after he went to the KBO for a year and had a very productive season overseas. So the Brewers are one of the teams listed. The Astros, the Orioles, the Twins, and the Yankees are the others who reportedly have interest. Spencer, I know you kind of found some of the numbers on him, so I'll let you do the deep dive of, or maybe not the deep dive, but the overview deep dive. It's kind of an in-between, but I'll let you do that, talking about his performance and kind of what makes him tick and how you think maybe that would translate to the big leagues. But I'll preface this by saying I always tell people to not get too out of control with Brewers are interested in player X. They're interested in, I would be willing to guess, like 90% of available players. Interested just means you've maybe reached out to that guy, or maybe you haven't even reached out to him. There are just some people in your front office who think this is a productive player. We would like to have him on our baseball team. So it's very easy to report that, not to invalidate the reporting. Will's a good reporter and Katie Wu's a good reporter. I trust both of them and any information they have. So I'm sure this isn't something made up, but it's also just not super substantial.
Yeah.
When it's team X is interested in player X, like, you could probably just surmise that yourself without even needing to talk to sources or needing to report on this stuff. But this is part of the business. It's just part of what makes following the hot stove fun. So I won't crap on it too much more. But I'll just let you dive into the breakdown here.
Well, I have to add on to that somewhat a little bit first. I will say, even especially when it comes to the Brewers being tied to pitchers, I sometimes wonder if agents and other teams like to throw out, the Rays and the Brewers are interested in pitcher A or whatever. Like, I think sometimes I always have that thought cross my mind when it comes to pitching, that like, the Guardians, the Rays, and the Brewers are all interested in this guy. He must be somebody we need to look at. And I mean, I doubt too many front offices operate that way, but I'm sure the Rockies have done that numerous times over the last few years. So I don't know. It is just more fun to get any sort of rumor tied to the Brewers right now, just because of everything that, I shouldn't say everything, because of the lack of anything happening really since the Devin trade. And prior to the Devin trade, there was pretty much nothing up until then as well. So the Brewers are pretty tight-lipped in general, and that is part of it as well. But just to talk about Hart a little bit. So this is a lefty. This is a guy who was a pretty late round pick. I want to say it was a 19th round pick out of college, probably 8-9 years ago now, by the Red Sox. And he just kind of moved his way through their system. He ended up in the top 30 for at least Baseball America. I believe Pipeline had him sneaking in as well. He made his debut in the COVID season. He threw around 10 innings, and I know the ERA was double digits. So it didn't go super well. But He ended up pitching in the minors. He kept getting decent results. 2023 was pretty rough. He ended up going over to the KBO. He changed some things with his pitch mix. His fastball, he always threw a 4-seam and a 2-seam. When he went to the KBO, the shape sort of blended together, except it was only a 2-seam. He was only throwing the 2-seam there. And it's a pitch with, it's really just, it's not a great shape. He throws it from a pretty low release. It's about 5.5 feet. So that helps it play up a little bit, but it's a pitch that's gotten hit in the minors. It's been hit even in the KBO. It was hit decently, not as well as it was in AAA, but I would still say the KBO probably lines up more with like a AA type of setting in most cases, comparatively. So it did okay. The big thing with him is that he does have 2 off-speed pitches that both perform pretty well. They both grade out pretty decently. He changed the shape on the slider a little bit this past year when he went over to the KBO. So it's got 7 inches of induced vertical break, and then it has 9 inches of sweep. He added a little bit of sweep to it. It's more, it really is just, he added more sweep to it. Now, I always have to wonder when you go to the KBO, the baseball is a little different. You wonder if the ball is just moving differently because of that. But this is kind of similar to Eric Fetty went over there and changed his shape a little bit on his slider. Then he came back to the U.S. and added a sweeper, which ended up being the big change for him in the breaking ball mix. But that's one guy that I think, if you looked at some of the data, there were some actual still concerns with Fetty. That's why he didn't get a huge contract. I mean, the White Sox they didn't have to spend that much to bring him in last year. And then obviously he performed pretty well, but I think the best pitch for Hart here is his changeup. It gets 16 inches of arm side run. He had a near 40% whiff rate on it in the KBO, and it was close to 40% in AAA a couple of years ago as well. It was always the pitch that kind of got him through the minors, even coming up as a prospect. It was seen as his best pitch. I think the slider took a little bit of a step, and that might be what teams are seeing. And then I think the fastball, I think teams probably feel slightly better about it. He did lower the release height, I should note, slightly from where it used to be. It's not a huge difference, but it has changed a little bit. And I wonder if that's making teams feel a little bit more comfortable about how the shape looks, because I don't know, man, when I see that, I would worry about the fastball getting hit. It just doesn't look like something that's going to perform super well to me. It didn't even perform that well in the KBO. But the slider and changeup are legit, and you have to wonder if a MLB team just kind of thinks we can make it work. We can figure out a fastball, especially the Brewers. The Brewers would probably end up separating the 2 fastballs again, if I had to guess. Like I said, he kind of combined them when he got to the KBO. The Brewers like to have multiple fastballs. My guess would be they'd go back to the 4-seam and a 2-seam. But either way, when I look at him, I'm slightly confused why there's so much interest in him. There's a lot of smart teams that seem to be interested in him. He did pretty well in the KBO, but I almost have this feeling of like everybody feels like they missed out on Eric Fetty and they don't want to miss out on the next guy coming back from the KBO. And that to me is kind of what I worry about with a guy like this. I don't see it that much. I don't want to knock him too much. And I do think, anybody gets in the Brewer system with 2 decent off-speed pitches, they might be able to make it work. So I'm not going to go like this would be a terrible signing for the Brewers. But when I look at it, it's not necessarily, I guess what I should say, and I'm rambling now, but what I should really say is that if I were targeting a player, I don't think this is somebody that I would personally be super interested in or going after super hard in free agency. Cheap deal coming off even, probably less than what Fetty got. Sure. I don't think it would hurt. But if the Brewers went out and spent more money on him than almost anybody else, they probably more than anybody else they signed this offseason, that would be a little weird to me. But Jack, you looked at the numbers now while I've been talking this whole time. Do you have any thoughts on it? Do you disagree with me? If you do, feel free. But I don't know. He just does not jump out to me when I watch him or when I look at any of the numbers.
This seems like a swingman fringe fifth starter type.
You have
probably.
Connor Thomas at home.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. You already have Connor Thomas, and honestly, I kind of like Connor Thomas's arsenal more than this.
Yeah.
There might be a little more deception to some of this. I don't know. I'm not sure. I'm just kind of being presented with it for the first time, but the slider has done well. The changeup has done well, but Thomas has more fastballs, so kind of depends on what your definition of deception is or what you consider deceptive. But yeah, I'm not seeing anything that really makes him jump out. I'm sure the Brewers probably think that he'd play up in front of their defense. That's always
Yeah.
something to think about. Um, actually, I have his Fangraphs page up. Do they have his? Okay, 60% ground ball rate in the KBO. I wonder if that's what they're looking at.
That could be.
This is actually where I'm really curious to see how much of that was the fastball shape change. Changing the arm slot, changing the shape a little bit. He's got
Yeah.
15 arm side. 12 induced vert, that's not really necessarily a rollover pitch. That's more run than you're not really getting any drop on that. That's mainly just it's straight and it's straight vertically and it's running arm side. But I would be willing to guess so. They probably would see him as a heavy sinker slider. Maybe you can change eye levels with a four seamer at the top. I don't know. I don't dislike it. It just seems he just seems very unremarkable, and I would have pretty a low ceiling expectation for him. If I had to guess, this is probably just the Brewers saying this is a guy who could maybe eat some innings. Let's see what the
Yeah.
cost is.
Yep.
I think that's really what it comes down to more than anything. But again, I do think it would be a little tricky to carry both him and Connor Thomas on the same roster. So Kyle Hart does have options left, but sometimes when these guys come back, they'll sign deals with provisions in their contracts that they can't be sent to the minor leagues. That was something that the Brewers did with Jay Jackson when they signed him. Jay Jackson was he had a provision that prevented him from being under team control after that year. His clause said he had to be a free agent after the year. Colin Ray had a similar thing too when he came back from Japan. But there are other guys who also will sign contracts where they say coming off of that success overseas that you can't be optioned at the minor league. So there's different things that they can do there to essentially prevent teams from exploiting them despite their lack of big league service time because these guys became established overseas. That kind of changes the ball game for them a little bit. I wonder if he's looking for something like that. If he's not, maybe then you could sign him to, a minor league deal with a big league invite or just a cheap MLB deal and still keep using those options. But it really just depends on what he wants. And this is all stuff that we don't know. So, like I said, this just feels like the Brewers doing some due diligence. Maybe like you touched on, Spencer, maybe it is someone on his side leaking that the Brewers are interested, because when you have a team that's got really good pitching development and you can convince other teams that they want you, maybe that is a way to pitch yourself a little bit more convincingly to other teams. But yeah, it really just feels like like I said, a swingman, fifth starter type profile. I don't think there's a very high ceiling here, but now that his name's been brought up and now that we're talking about him more, you can guarantee I'm going to try to look into this more. So that's all we really have on Kyle Hart for now, though. And with that, we'll transition to
Well, Jack,
answering
we do have some
lots of
breaking
listener
news.
questions. We have breaking news,
We have a
really.
Kurt Hogue bomb on the timeline. The Brewers just made a trade. They traded Mason Molina, who was drafted this past season, to the Rangers for right-handed pitcher Grant Anderson. Tyler J DFA'd to make room on the 40-man.
So the Tyler
I
J.
know a little bit about Anderson.
Tyler J. DFA has come to fruition. I didn't think he had much longer on the 40-man.
No. Anderson, I know a little bit about, a guy who just kept getting outs in the minors for the Rangers. It looks like he did the same this year. The four seam seems to play really well in AAA and then get hit quite hard in MLB, but it's a pretty heavy sinker. This actually does line up a little bit with what we were just talking about. This is negative 1.5 inches of induced vertical break. In MLB, it averaged 17 inches of run. In AAA, it averaged closer to 16. But that's quite a bit of movement on the sinker. Now, it does not get whiffs, which isn't shocking, but it does get quite a few grounders, it looks like. Slider has had a pretty good whiff rate in AAA. Again, it was a decent whiff rate in MLB, but it got hit a little bit more. Interesting. I'm not going to make you talk about him because it's obviously just
how about you keep talking so I can send out a tweet and start
yeah, I'll let you do your
pulling up his
job.
page. We're just gonna do this in real time. This will
Yeah,
give
we will.
everybody kind of a peek behind the curtain of how our brains work the moment the Brewers acquire someone who's probably not even going to pitch a ton of innings for them, but we're freaks,
No.
so this is what we look at.
Yeah. So in AAA, he had a 2.43 FIP with a 28% strikeout rate, 11.7% walk rate, which that's probably a bit higher than you'd want, but especially with the amount of movement he's getting on that sinker, that doesn't shock me a ton. I feel like that's kind of the Elvis Peguero type of situation you run into sometimes. Though I should note, Anderson's sitting around 92 on both fastballs. This isn't the high velo type of guy, but this is somebody who does seem to get a lot of grounders, kind of in line with what we were just talking about with Hart, something they might be looking for. I don't think Anderson's been starting. I'm trying to figure it out, but I know he started earlier in his minor league career. I don't think he's been making starts for a couple of years. My guess is this is strictly a bullpen move. But interesting. He is actually no. He really hasn't started much at all in his career, but he did have a 3.54 ERA in 40 innings with Nope, that's minor league. See, this is what happens when we're doing it live, and I'm looking at 30 lines on Fangraphs.
We'll
And
do it
trying to line them up.
live. Have you seen that? Have you seen the meme? We'll do it live.
Oh yeah, I've seen the meme.
What's
Yeah,
his face? I don't
Family
even remember
Guy
the guy's
created
name.
it or recreated it too. It was great. Yeah, the strikeout rate has just gone down significantly every time he's come up to MLB. The 2 times he's come up to MLB, but it's been like 12, like 11.5 or higher for like 6 or at like 4 or 5 levels of the minors. Seems like he gets a lot of whiff down there. He's only 27. When does he turn 28? Not until June. So he's not old. I know he was a top guy at one point, not a top guy, but yeah, Fangraphs had a grade on him. They gave him a 55 slider, a 50 fastball, 60 command, which is interesting because the walks have been a little bit of a problem. But
that was like what they emphasized with Thomas too. He had like 60 grade command from some outlets.
Yeah, it looks like the ground ball rate is more. So I should note he throws a lot of four seam. I wonder if the Brewers are going to flip the usage on the fastball.
Maybe I wasn't paying attention if you said it. What's the shape?
It's not good. I'll pull it back up here
for any of them.
It's the four seam is 9 induced vertical and 12.9 horizontal. So that almost sounds more two seamish while he has the sinker and a two seam with the weight. I mean, that's not much induced vertical, and it's not from like a low.
What's his?
Oh no, wait, he does throw from a crazy low.
Okay, so he's release. A vertical approach angle guy, or what?
Yep, negative 3.7 on the four seam.
Is it like a
super low release? He's 4.4. He must be coming from the side.
Is it like a Hobie type deal? Because Hobie had a four seamer where the shape would say he should only throw sinkers, but it played up at the top. Because
I'm starting to think that might be. I'm thinking he might be a sidearm guy. I gotta find some video while we're doing this, but yeah, the slider's thrown from 4 inches lower, it looks like on average. So that might be a big enough difference where hitters are picking that up in
like a release
MLB,
point, like a tipping it type deal.
Yeah, so I mean, maybe they think that's something they can fix, but the slider grades out pretty well. The sinker seems like it can get a lot of grounders. And the four seam has been at times a decent whiff pitch. So I'm thinking they're probably just going to try and optimize all of that and use the sinker more for ground balls. Then when they have opportunity to go up in the zone from a weird angle with the four seam, try and do that, use that vertical approach angle. And then the slider has been his most used pitch, both in AAA and MLB. So I'm guessing he uses that quite a bit to kind of just drive everything else. But yeah, interesting.
We're on video right now. If I go to his Savant page, can I just pull up a random video of him and We can put that on the screen.
Yeah, you should be able to. You just got to
Okay.
share your screen.
I'll
But
yeah, let's see here.
yeah. Well, while you
Well,
do
so
that,
you
I'll
look at
talk about Lena. Oh,
if you look
go.
at the movement plot, he's like the 4 in the so it's like obviously major sink because he's got such a
Oh yeah.
low his arm angle is -3 degrees. And then yeah, so he's going to use both. They're very distinct. It's big sink because he's from down there on the sinker, and then the 4 has enough not carry, but enough separation where if he's throwing it from down there and you throw it at the top,
Yeah.
you're you're going to be able to get some deception there. Let me see if I can get this up.
While you work on that, since we have audio listeners only, I'll talk about Mason Molina, who they traded. This guy I kind of comp to Ethan Small, but in like a slightly better breaking ball way. So like low 90s, upper 80s, high carry fastball from the left side. Changeup is probably his best pitch. And then I think it's a pretty decent breaking ball. So he'll be interesting. I'm a little surprised they gave. He was just selected in last year's draft, so slightly surprised that they are moving on from him already. But at the same time, they clearly like what they see in Grant Anderson. So yeah,
this is So he's also got like a little bit of the rise slider because of where he throws it from. If you can see that, it should be on the screen now. His movement plot.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna kind of scroll through some of this stuff. He's heavy slider in the big leagues. How many innings did he throw up here? 26.
Total?
That's not like a nothing
No.
sample size. Has he changed anything from? Looks like he did. You? I wasn't paying a whole lot of attention while you were talking. Did you say he added more movement on the slider? Look at this shift.
I did not. I hadn't looked back at the next.
So
the
he's like
he
kind of went like a little more towards a sweeper. I don't know if anything
Okay.
changed on the velo with that. Yeah, he did. So he went from 85 slider miles an hour to 82 with more sweep. So I wonder if he went more sweeper. He's got more coverage here now with kind of this gap here. So so it looks like he went more sweeper. I don't know if anything else really changed with anything. The other thing like to look at is did he move on the rubber at all to change some angles or anything? But my guess is like I think there's probably pretty good righty specialist profile here at the very least. I'm curious where let's get a video up of him. If that'll load. So this is 2023. I'm trying to see where is he. Okay. Yep. So he's on the first base side in 2023. You can see here. Look at how he starts too. He's like
Rangers bullpen
back
has
to the
it from
hitter.
here with a
Oh,
3-1 lead, and that's wide.
funky.
Full count.
Oh yeah. I think I remember him pitching against the Brewers a couple of years ago.
Back to the so he's on the first base side of the rubber, and he starts with his back to the hitter, and he almost kind of does. It's not like as extreme as Dontrell Willis, but kind of think of like he's got like the twist back, like he twists his back to the hitter
Rangers
basically.
bullpen has it from here with a
and it's like a really funky. He hides the ball pretty well, and then he comes and like slings it across basically.
3-1 lead, and
that's he plants like basically straight in front of the hitter, but he's coming very crossfire from a sidearm.
Rangers bullpen has it from here with a 3-1 lead.
And this is 2023. Let's see if we can get a 2024. That's 2023 again. Here's a 2024. I don't know if anything changed here from one year to the next. I'm just looking at this with a fresh set of eyes. Looks like he calmed down the
yeah.
Look at this, Spencer. He definitely calmed that. So like the exaggerated movement as he's beginning his delivery, he definitely calmed that down. At least
yes,
in this video, he did. So it was, yeah. So 2023, he's like very big. Like it's going to be tricky for me to describe this on audio. Basically, like I have a ball in front of me here. He's set like this. Again, this is a visual demonstration, but maybe if I do it this way, I can describe it with words a little better. But he basically is like separating his hand with the ball in it out of his glove, like really dramatically as he starts twisting back like that. In 2024, he got rid of a lot of that, or at least he did in this clip that we're looking at right now. This is from June of 2024. So yeah, there's a it just looks like he cleaned everything up a little bit. It looks a lot more quiet.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe that's just easier for repeating that delivery. To have 60 command too with like this kind of look is that's definitely something. That's not nothing either. Yeah, this is interesting. I think this might, again, my toxic trait is that I say this about a lot of guys. I can talk myself into a lot of pitchers, but this might be a dude, like a nice little guy who he's got one option year left. So we've talked about that before a lot as well. The Brewers needing just some more guys who they can shuffle through some of these
Yes.
spots in the bullpen. He definitely fits that bill as well. But yeah, there's some deception here. My guess is because the angle is so extreme, he's going to have to stay on the first base side because it's going to be impossible to command anything if he's way over on the third base side. Because his release point is just going to be so off that it's very tricky to command anything when you're that extreme like that. Just trying to look here. So 34% whiff rate on the four-seamer in the big leagues in 24, 38% in 23. So yeah, that's a flat vertical approach angle. He's going to throw it at the top because even though the shape isn't great because he's like slinging it from down under basically, it's just going to look really funky to the hitter coming at the top of the zone, and they're still going to swing under it as if it were a fastball that had a lot of a carry to it at the top. I wonder if he's going to be a throw the slider at the top a little bit too, kind of like the whichever Rogers brother it is, because they all have like very similar names. But Tyler, Trevor, like all these guys, Taylor, whichever one it is, the one I'm talking about though for the Giants, who's got
that's Tyler.
That's Tyler. Okay. He's a big slider at the top guy. I could conceivably maybe see them doing that with, again, like it's more of a sweeper now, but maybe they do that a little bit with him just so he's throwing something else up there. But otherwise, this looks like it's going to be sinker down, slider, which is looking more like a sweeper now, is going to play off of that, and four seamers at the top. This is like, he throws harder than Hobie, but this is very like right-handed Hobie.
Yeah.
To me. That's what I see. Yeah, this is interesting. I don't know if you have any more thoughts on him just after we're going through this. We can kind of move it along here if that's the case. But yeah, there's some funk here. I think I'm not sure how much they really have to change with him either. It seems like he's already done a couple things that have him in a much better spot.
It feels more like pitch usage or like location might be what they mess with a little bit more than anything else. Yeah.
The walk rate has not been like anything special in the big leagues. But again, if he's got, you said he had 60 grade command, huh? From Fangraphs?
That's what Fangraphs gave him
in 2023. Yeah, this is yeah, so again, like I'd say the summary here is like this is kind of right-handed Hobie like. I wonder if that's kind of what they're going for here. Like, just can you replicate the same kind of success that he had, but as a righty? Yeah, I think that's kind of what they're going for here. And again, he's got that one more option year left. Yeah, that's interesting. We can move on now, but now like my head's going to be preoccupied with what I can write about this guy. So maybe that'll already be up on Friday morning if you check Brewer Fanatic, because I'm going to be up all night now looking at Grant Anderson because I'm a sicko. But we can finally move into some listener questions now if that's what you want to do.
Yeah, let's do it. That was fun though.
It was. Yeah, that was.
I want to break more news. I want more news to break while we're live. That's great.
I can't like doing that. I think we should try to mix that in a little bit more. But now listener questions. Okay, let's try to get back on track here. We'll start with Ralph, who asks about Caleb Durbin. So he said, what's your opinion on Caleb Durbin starting at second base and Bryce Terang at shortstop? Another scenario would be Durbin and Oliver Dunn platoon. In that case, you're probably looking at a platoon at third base, or maybe they shift some things around a little bit based on who's playing. But really his question, he said, is what's Durbin's role? Probably, I think we touched on this a little bit when we talked about him a couple episodes ago. I think Durbin and Dunn is probably the way to go right now. Some mix of those two, because like we talked about before, Dunn is the very high upside, very low floor guy. And Durbin is the opposite, where because he doesn't hit for a lot of power, the ceiling's not crazy high, but the floor is pretty high because this is a guy who walked more than he struck out in the minor leagues. He's probably going to get on base at a decent clip. He's really fast. He can impact the game that way. He's a good defender too. So I think that they sort of complement each other a little bit in that sense. It kind of gives the Brewers those two worlds, and that could potentially make for a productive mix. Again, I don't think they're done yet with the infield mix. I think there's one more, not a huge domino that's going to drop, but I think something else is going to happen on that front. But I think right now, if things hold the way they are, I think you're probably looking at, I'm going to say, probably some kind of combination of Dunn and Durbin at third. I think that's the way they're going to go. Durbin does profile a lot better at second base than he does at third. But if he's pairing with Dunn, I think they might just, for the sake of consistency for Joey Ortiz and Bryce Terang, two guys who have established themselves a little more now, I think they would probably just platoon those guys at third base or mix and match in some capacity there. It really seems like the internal preference is for Joey Ortiz to play short. The Brewers haven't come out and said it, but just from little snippets, little things you hear, I think they want Joey Ortiz at shortstop and they want to keep Terang at second. Pat Murphy has said it publicly that he would prefer to keep Bryce Terang at second base, but they haven't made a decision yet. So, like I said, if nothing else happens, I think right now you're probably looking at Durbin and Dunn mixing and matching it in some capacity. But if there's another move made that locks down third base a little more, then I think Durbin is kind of your utility type. Then I think you fill Andra Monasterio role.
Yeah, agreed. I think the Brewers' question is basically, depending on how they think Ortiz is going to play at short, but I think they probably view him as somebody who's going to be, I mean, at worst above average. My guess would be is they think he's going to be probably a plus defender at short. He got plus grades all the way through the minors as a shortstop. He took the third base very quickly. So I think they want a very, very good defender, a plus defender at second, like they have in Terang. I think they view Ortiz as potentially being similar to that at short, and they're willing to put up with probably closer to average or a little above. I mean, Oliver Dunn graded out super well defensively in his time at third base last year. Like I've said, I think Durbin can handle it. I worry, obviously, it's just a very, very small frame over there to take away balls down the line and that type of stuff. Like you always wonder if that's going to come into play here. But I think the choice is kind of, do you want above average at each spot, or do you want potentially 2+ defenders and average at the other? I think you probably want the potentially 2+ guys up the middle would be my guess. But yeah, I think they go with Durbin and Dunn at third. That sounds like a law office or something. Durbin and Dunn at third, and
I feel like it would be Dunn and Durbin. I think that's how you'd order it. That seems to roll off the tongue a little better.
Is it? I feel like it's always the shorter syllable.
Or is it? I don't know. I'm not an expert on law firms.
I'm not a lawyer. But no, I think that's probably what they do. I agree with you, and then I also agree that I think they make another move. And we did get another question from Ralph on that, asking about Yoan Moncada, who we've talked about before, but he mentions he's still available, or is he trouble? He asks. No, I think Moncada still makes plenty of sense here, especially now. I think he makes even more sense than maybe when we were talking before. I think options have started to come off the board. A guy like Josh Rojas is no longer on the board, who we had talked about before. So I think Moncada makes plenty of sense, and I definitely wouldn't be shocked if the Brewers ended up going that route. He's kind of getting to that point in the offseason where he was already probably going to be a 1-year prove-it deal, but now you're wondering how much he's even going to get in that 1 year. So he makes plenty of sense. I definitely would have no issue with them going that route. And like you said, then you make Durbin the right-handed option as a utility guy, taking that Monasterio role.
Yeah, like you'd mentioned, I actually picked Moncada as my guy to sign for third base when we did our offseason plans. Not because I really like him a lot as a player, but I think he's just kind of the cleanest guy to put over there in terms of someone who has had some success before. I think he gives you roster flexibility too as a switch hitter, just all these different things. I would not be surprised at all, speculatively speaking, if he's who the Brewers end up with. It really does feel like it's trending that way, but we'll see what happens. RW asks us, there are rumors of Rhys Hoskins being available via trade. He means if Hoskins were dealt, who would be playing first base for the Brewers next year? I'm almost certain Rhys Hoskins is available. That's probably something the Brewers are very open to getting out of, if they can, getting out of the commitment they have to him for next year. I don't have the payroll page up in front of me, but I believe it's somewhere in that. It's like 17 million he's making.
18, yeah.
18, because I knew it was a backloaded deal. But we've talked before about how kind of what's unfolding right now is basically what the downside always was to signing Rhys Hoskins. Like, if it was going to go poorly, this is probably how it was going to play out, and that is the situation the Brewers find themselves in. That said, I think that now that the first base market has cleared up a little bit, this feels even less likely to me. I think it was never going to happen to begin with because nobody's going to want Rhys Hoskins at that price. Nobody's going to trade for him. I think if the Brewers really wanted to get rid of him, they probably would have had to attach a prospect to him, especially if they didn't want to send any money over with him. That was never happening. I think you were always just better off counting on a bounce back. So I think that's still what's going to happen. But if it were to happen, the reason why I think it would have happened earlier is because it would have been the Brewers clearing space to acquire somebody else to play first base. I know Tim Muma wrote about this at Brewer Fanatic a while before it actually happened, or at least half of it happened. The Rangers trading Nathaniel Lowe.
Yeah.
Tim talked about how he'd be a good fit for the Brewers. But really, and I agree with him, I think he would have been. But to make that happen, you would have needed to move Rhys Hoskins somehow. And I don't think that's something that was ever really the best way for the Brewers to go. Like I said, probably the only way you're getting rid of him is if you attach a prospect to him. I don't think that's very smart. I understand wanting to get out of the financial commitment there, but it's 1 year left on that deal. It's not a terrible situation to be in. I think there is bounce back potential.
Yeah. And, so power is one of the things they need in this lineup next year too. Mm-hmm. So
yeah, of course. Yeah. And that's the thing. Lowe's not really like a huge power threat as far as first basemen go. Like, I think there is a very decent chance that Rhys Hoskins hits for more power than Nathaniel Lowe. Not that he's he's hit over 20 home runs before, I believe Lowe has, but I think Hoskins still has that 30 home run ceiling in him. That's just not something you're probably going to get with Nathaniel Lowe. His career high in home runs was 27 Lowe in 2022. I just pulled up his baseball ref page. But these last two seasons, 17 home runs, 16. I do think you could get more. You already got more home run output than that from Rhys Hoskins, even if the bottom line numbers were worse and the overall production was worse. But just for the sake of the question, if he were dealt, who's playing first base? I mean, that's the thing. You don't really have anybody. It's Tyler Black after that. And again, I think that's why this isn't going to happen, because there are no alternatives. I think the guys who the Brewers could have gone for to replace him, whether it's Lowe or Josh Naylor was traded by the Cleveland Guardians as well. Someone like that, I think, is a similar kind of profile or a similar kind of fit if you didn't have Rhys Hoskins, but those guys are off the market. The Brewers haven't offloaded Hoskins. Yeah, you don't have a lot of options right now. So I think that's part of the reason why, as unlikely as it always was that they were going to move him, I think now it's even more unlikely. I don't think that's going to happen.
Yeah, I agree. The only internal option coming out of spring would be Tyler Black. And I've talked a number of times about, I do believe Black is going to hit, but I think he's an even worse defender than Rhys Hoskins. And I think you're not getting that power that we talked about, and you're still not getting as sure of a thing, no matter what I believe about Tyler Black. He's not a sure thing to hit in MLB. And even in Rhys's pretty much worst case scenario season last year offensively, he was borderline an average hitter who hit 26 homers. The defense was terrible, so he was basically a replacement level player overall, but hitting offensively, it could have been worse, and you could get worse production from first. We've seen the Brewers get worse production from first base plenty of times over the years. So it's not ideal. Obviously, I think best case scenario would have been being able to move Rhys Hoskins, or obviously not having him this year, and being able to trade for a Nathaniel Lowe, especially for what he went for. I think that was the hardest part, was seeing that he went for basically what the Brewers have in spades, which is a bunch of left-handed relievers who are like decent with better peripherals than overall numbers, maybe in some cases. That's basically what he ended up going for. But either way, I don't think we're going to see Rhys moved unless for some reason somebody's paying an actual legitimate trade to get him. I don't think they're just going to move him to get rid of him. I don't think that makes sense either.
This guy 4444 asks, I'd like to know your opinion of using relievers for multiple innings followed by multiple days rest, just like they used Brian Hudson this year. I guess technically it's last year now. Is 2025 like the cutoff? Now we can start calling it last year. That's my least favorite part of off-season writing and off-season talking, that this year, last year deal. But he's talking about Brian Hudson in 2024, how the Brewers used him. Does the routine rest offset the extra innings that this would lead to over the course of the year, pitching multiple innings? Do you think Hudson will be used this way again? So the first thing I'll say here about Brian Hudson is I think we need to say right off the bat, I think Brian Hudson physically is such a different case, such a special case, that I don't think regular usage rules are ever going to apply to him.
No.
So he has a history of going multiple innings. He was developed mostly as a starter, and even when he moved to the bullpen a couple of years ago in the Dodgers system, he was still working multiple innings a lot. But that's only a small part of it. I think a lot of this also comes down to this is a really big guy, and a really big guy who uses his body in such an unconventional way, the way he throws a baseball. He extends really far down the mound. That can take a lot of effort to do that when you're almost 7 feet tall and you're driving down the mound as far as he does. A lot of times big extension or tall guys don't have quite as much extension because it can be hard to get all that mass down the mound like that. Like if you look at a guy like even Trevor McGill, he doesn't have great extension for a guy his size. So it's not like a 1-to-1 relationship, height, leg length to extension. But he also throws from a really weird slot. He comes across his body. I think that is naturally the way his body moves, and the Brewers did a good job of maximizing that. But at the same time, it also is very taxing, just this combination of how he's built, the way he moves, all of these things. And Pat Murphy kind of danced around it a little bit. There were multiple times throughout the season where in our pregame media sessions, he would kind of like say it briefly, talking about Brian Hudson, about how he doesn't bounce back well. He does not recover well from outings. And I think that's the case whether he goes 1 inning or 2 or 3. So you know that it's just always going to be physically really tricky for him, for his body to bounce back well enough, fast enough to go back-to-back days. That's probably just never going to be something he's able to do, regardless of whether it's single innings or multiple innings. So I think with that in mind, they are using him the right way. Just on a day when he's available, when you know he's feeling good, just get those bullets out of him. You know he's probably going to have to be down for at least 1 day, maybe 2. So if that's the reality you're faced with, just get multiple out of him. See if he can kind of eat up some innings in the middle to be that bridge between, maybe a 5 and dive guy and then your back end of your bullpen, which is now, Trevor McGill and Jared Koenig and probably still Piamps, those kinds of guys. In general, I think it depends on the guy, really. I think it also depends a lot on what the rest of your bullpen looks like. You need to have the right guys behind him to enable that kind of usage. This was the case when the Brewers had Josh Hader a few years ago and he was going multiple. But we did find out from how he preferred to be used after he lost an ARB case that he always was capable of going back-to-backs. He was capable of being a 1-inning guy. So it didn't turn out to be a health or physicality thing. And I think it worked for the Brewers to use Hader the way they originally did in 2018 because you had Jeremy Jefferson, Corey Knebel, and down the stretch, Joakim Soria, these 1-inning guys who were much more available and could do the back-to-backs. So you could survive without having Josh Hader for a day. You can have Josh Hader ready to go multiple on that day where it is a short start and we need this guy to be a bridge. Just mow down the middle of the order in this close game and get us home so we can go to Knebel, go to Jeffress, and slam the door on this thing. I think you need to have that kind of setup to use one of your other pitchers in that way. And I think the Brewers have that again with Brian Hudson because their bullpen is so deep. You can survive if Brian Hudson's not available. I mean, even without Devin Williams, you still have McGill, Koenig. Piamps, all these guys. Abner Uribe is going to be in the mix again. I'm not sure how much the Brewers will get out of him in 2025, but that's a topic for another day. But you have guys who will be available a little bit more frequently, and I think that's a big deal. So with all that said, I think they use Hudson the right way based on what works best for him, and it works within the context of what the Brewers have behind him in that bullpen. So I think that's not really going to change a whole lot when we get into 2025, unless something changes and Brian Hudson is all of a sudden able to do back-to-backs completely fine. Maybe then it changes a little bit. But other than that, I would guess it's probably going to be a little similar. If anything is going to change, I think it's going to be that they might already start giving him more off days right off the bat.
Yep.
Because the pacing of it was like he would get some days off after the multiples, but it would be like one day off and then he's right back. One day off and then he's right back. They might do early on more of these, okay, you went 2, you're down the next 2 days. Or we're going to try to use you maybe only once a series or something like that. But otherwise, I think the general concept of how they use him is probably going to be similar.
Yeah, you hit on the one point I was going to make at the very end. And I think what ended up costing him wasn't the overall idea behind what they were doing, which was to give him rest after he pitched, to have him go multiple and take time off. But it felt like every single time he became available, he pitched at the beginning of the season. And that, to me, was more how he kind of wore out by mid-season. Was, yes, you were, in a way, you were handling it like responsibly, but at the same time, it really wasn't, because the actual amount of innings he was throwing was getting up there towards anything he had done in the last few years, minors or majors, by like the All-Star break. So you were using him quite a bit. And I think the overall idea behind what he does is, like you said, I don't disagree at all. I think he goes right back into that type of role, assuming he's on the major league roster to start next season, which I don't know is as much of a foregone conclusion as I think most people are assuming. I think he probably will be, but I'm not going to guarantee it. He still has an option year, I believe. But overall, yeah, assuming he's performing and assuming he's on the major league roster, I think it's going to be a similar usage rate. And just for the general idea of it, I think, as Jack said, it's pitcher dependent, and it's also dependent on the other pitchers in the bullpen and kind of how they fit around that type of usage schedule and how they can make it work. So it's really, really dependent on whatever the situation is that each player is in. So it's not necessarily the right way to do it. The same pitcher could be the wrong way to handle one pitcher for one team and the right way to handle that same pitcher on a different team, and vice versa. So it's kind of weird how that can work, but it is all very dependent on just everything else around it.
I did pull open his game log early on, because the point you made about him pitching every day, he seemed to be available, even if he probably shouldn't have. This could be something maybe we can kind of tie back to as like an example of something we were worried about early in the season when we talked about
I'm
Pat
pretty
Murphy.
sure we talked about this.
We talked about this a lot, Pat, and we did get a little bit of heat for it, but this is what we talked about. Pat Murphy, when you use some of these guys, and you could give him the benefit of the doubt with Hudson because maybe he didn't know right away he was a leverage guy, but I'm looking at these game logs, and there are like I'm seeing days in May here where he's entering with the Brewers down 1 and pitching 2 innings, and the Brewers went on to lose the game by 1 or 2 or whatever it was. Again, when you're burning bullets on those days, yes, Brian Hudson's available, and again, I'm not going to look through these box scores and figure out who was all available that day, so I'm not going to put my full conviction into saying this, but my inclination is, from looking at this, is that maybe in a way Brian Hudson was kind of a victim of what Pat Murphy was doing a little bit early in the year, where it was, well, we're only down 1. We're not going to pitch Thiago Vieira now. We're going to pitch Brian Hudson now. And then they end up losing that game, and now it's 2 more innings on Brian Hudson's workload already in May that you probably would have been better off getting when you were ahead in the game in July or August or something like that. So this is kind of what we're talking about when we talk about the need to responsibly pace relievers. We've talked about this a lot. I'm not going to go through the whole spiel again. I know Murphy had a tough situation for most of the year, especially at the beginning of the year, where his starters just could not eat innings to save their lives. But I do think he missed opportunities to just throw a low leverage guy out there when you're down by 1 or 2 in the game in May. You got to do it. I think it got a little better as the year continued. But this is the kind of stuff that we were, or at least it appears to be the kind of thing that we were a little worried about when we were talking about this early on. But I won't go through the whole 9 yards of that. Like I said, we can move on to some more questions. Older Potato on Twitter asked us a few. And this is kind of where we start to get into a little bit of draft related questions. So this isn't the official minor league sandbox, but I think I'm just going to let you take most of these. So the first question, with the price of starting pitching continuing to go up, does that change how you approach the draft or international signing markets? It seems like it shouldn't, but then again, I don't see the Brewers competing to sign any of the available top starting pitchers.
Yeah, I get the question for sure. It is certainly going up. It's kind of crazy to see some of the contracts some of these starters are getting. But from the Brewers' perspective, first of all, I would say definitely not. I don't think there's any need to change the approach that they have right now at all. For me, one, if let's say you hit on all your position prospects, you can trade them for pitching. We've actually seen the Orioles do something like that with the Corbin Burns trade from their perspective. Let's say, I guess for the Brewers, I wouldn't change anything in the draft from what they've done the last few years because I think they're doing a very good job. They traded Mason Molina today for Grant Anderson, who Anderson could help this season. They traded a guy like Justin Chambers, who was a 19th round pick last in the 2023 class, for Brian Hudson, who we just talked about. And obviously he had a very good first half of the season. You can use the draft to acquire very good talent, and then you can move that talent if you need to fill the spots that you need on the major league club. I think the international market and the draft you should never really worry about position or anything else. It should just be, let's accumulate as much talent as we can possibly bring into the system, which the Brewers do that in the draft by moving the money all around and doing things that way. And in the international market, they do similar things because they have signed like a top three biggest class for a long time now. They just keep doing that. They keep bringing in more players than most teams do because it gives them more shots to hit on people. And they trust their scouting and they do all of that. So I get the question, but I think you can use the draft and international market and just get as much talent as you want, as you can, I should say, into the organization. And then if you need to move that talent to get a starting pitcher because that's what you need, that's what you can do. So from that perspective, I don't think they'll change it. Now, I think there are other teams that probably will look at it and try to do something like that. But other teams also aren't very good at drafting or signing from the international markets currently anyway. So they probably could use a change in kind of their attack, how they attack both of those markets. So for the Brewers, I definitely would not. And I doubt that they will.
Second question, if you were building the team, how much would your ETAs for prospects factor into trades and free agents? Could this explain the lack of a long-term third base added this offseason because the Brewers have guys like Cooper Pratt, Mike Bovee ascending through the minor leagues?
Yeah, that's a really good question too, because I think there's a very real chance that this is factoring into what they've been doing this offseason. And they see a guy like Durbin. My guess is when they bring in a guy like Durbin, they're thinking, well, if we have to play him every day, we can probably live with it. But our best case scenario would be him being more of a super utility guy that we can move all around, who can steal bases off the bench, who can give us some pinch hit at bats off the bench, who can fill in when we need it. But I don't think they are going out and they've gone after anybody that they view as more of a long-term solution to third base. And I do think, personally, I think it's Pratt that they really like. I think the organization absolutely loves Cooper Pratt. They pushed him to Double-A very quickly last year in time for the playoffs. I think they see Ortiz and Pratt as their kind of future left side of the infield, potentially in 2026. I think that's probably their hope, is that Pratt is up and playing in 2026 with Joey Ortiz. I don't know which one is at which spot defensively. I think they'd probably feel pretty comfortable with either of them at either spot. But I do think they factor it in. Now, they don't factor it in for a Jesus Mate. That's not part of their equation. But I think if somebody they believe can be up next year and they have strong opinions on, and they firmly believe that he's legitimately a major league player, I bet it does. I bet it does factor in. For me personally, because obviously that's kind of where the question was pointed, I would handle it similarly. I think this isn't something, again, where I'm looking at Yoferi Rodriguez and going, I can't acquire an outfielder because in 2027 or 2028, Yoferi Rodriguez might be ready to go and help. And Jesus Mate, I can't have somebody covering up second base over the 2030s. You already saw it, honestly, with William Contreras at catcher. I think internally and externally, a lot of people viewed Jefferson Cairo as the future catcher. There's a very good chance we would have seen Jefferson Cairo this year if he had not been hurt. But the Brewers weren't going to say no to acquiring William Contreras and trying to turn him into a good defensive catcher and potentially an all-star because Jefferson Cairo was in high A as a 19-year-old. They weren't going to do that. But I do think the closer they get to the majors, the more they start factoring in. And if it's a one-year ETA, I do think it factors into whether they're going to really aggressively pursue somebody. If it falls into their laps, a really good player falls into their laps, they're not going to say no just because Cooper Pratt's sitting there. But are they going to go out and aggressively go, we're going to try and find somebody that we can sign to a 4-year deal to play third base? No, I don't think they're going to, because they probably do feel pretty comfortable about what they have coming up behind them. So that's a really good question. I don't know how they view it, but that would be my guess as to how the Brewers are kind of attacking things. And I do think it factors at least partially into the equation for them here.
Cheesehead Kami had another draft player development centric question. He asked, with the 2025 draft order mostly complete, how excited are you for draft season? Well, that's a dumb question. I'm sure I know what your answer is going to be for that. How excited are you for draft season with the Brewers having 3 first-round Comp A picks? What players are you laser focused on in the upcoming college baseball season for potential Brewers selections? I'm sorry, it sounded like I just yelled at him for asking the question. I was just making a joke about Spencer's draft obsession, but I'm sure this should be a good answer.
Oh, I am very excited for this draft. This is the culmination of a couple decisions they made last year, holding on to Willy Adames, not signing Chris Livonis, or picking Chris Livonis, knowing there was a pretty good chance they weren't going to sign him. And day one actually got a little longer. We have the 3rd round now, so we have an extra pick on day one because it's only going to be a 2-day draft moving forward, which day 2 is going to be long. Let me tell you, they got to go through the 4th all the way through the 20th. But I suppose in the past they used to go from the 11th all the way through 40 rounds, so they'll be able to make it work. But either way, there are some players I'm looking at early on here. Nick Dumanil, he is from California Baptist, which this would easily be one of their, it would be easily their highest position player ever drafted. Outfielder, he's got really, there's big pop, and I really like the swing. He played in the Cape. His bat speed in the Cape averaged 79.9 miles per hour using wood bats for the first time here in a legit league. And he went 26 of 27 on stolen bases as well in the Cape. There are concerns about, facing better competition. His strikeout rate did go from 11% at Cal Baptist to close to, or just over 20 in the Cape. But I think there was an adjustment period and he started to kind of settle in from what reports were. I'm a big fan, and he's kind of my guy right now looking forward to the draft. And this is so early, so that's going to change most likely, but he's one I will be trying to watch this upcoming season. A couple other names. Caden Bodine from Coastal Carolina is a switch hitting catcher. He's played some center field. He's a very good athlete. It's a pretty good bat. I think he can catch. I think it's more the arm that would worry me behind the plate than his ability to actually catch. But I'm buying the bat, and I think he could probably hit even if he has to move off of catcher. Trey Phelps, outfielder / third base at Georgia, but I think he's probably an outfielder, right fielder moving forward. Really good athlete. He mashed as a freshman, and he's going to be a sophomore, draft eligible sophomore. He had great contact rates. He hit the ball in the air a ton, and he didn't strike out hardly at all. It's just a matter of what the defensive home is for him. But for me, he's a good enough athlete with a good arm. I think he's just, you put him in right field and you let the bat do the work. This is not a Kyle Schwarber type of defensive profile. He can play right field and handle it. So he's super interesting to me. A couple maybe not, those are first round guys that I'm looking at. Brady Neal is a catcher from Alabama. The Brewers actually drafted him in 2022. He was one of the youngest guys in the draft that year out of high school. He was committed to LSU. He ended up going there, obviously. He transferred to Alabama this offseason. He had a 986 OPS last year for LSU. Very good defender, and he gets as high of praise as I've ever heard for, even back when he got drafted by the Brewers out of high school. Neal was getting praised for his ability to handle a staff at like a level you don't hear often for kids. Like he was 17 years old. And it's just gone even higher since he went into college. So that's the type of guy the Brewers tend to like as a catcher. They love guys who can really handle a staff. I think there's more in the bat, and he'll be only 20 at draft day. So he seems like an interesting guy. Cade Anderson's a lefty pitcher. I got two pitchers now. Cade Anderson's a lefty pitcher at LSU. He's more of a low 90s fastball. He's been up to 95, but it's got really big carry, and he throws it really well at the top of the zone. He commands it extremely well, and then he throws a huge breaking ball, curveball that plays really well off of it. I actually saw somebody but he showed the spin, and he actually has like the four-seam spin on the curveball, so it's extremely hard for a hitter to pick up. But a lefty with two really good pitches. He has an upper 70s changeup. He really hasn't had to use it in college because there's been no need for it yet. And then he started throwing a mid-80s slider this past season, and it worked really well as well. Right now, he's more of like a round 2 or 3 guy. For me, if he has a good college year, he's one of those guys who I could see just shooting up boards and being more a first-round option. And then the last one is out of Elon, Justin Mitrovic. He's a right-handed pitcher as well. Elon's had some pretty good pitchers come out of there over the years. He's 6'3". He's built well. He throws a ton of strikes. He's kind of low 90s now, but he's been up to 96. He has a slider and a changeup that both had a ton of whiffs last season. The changeup was really, really good. One of the better whiff rates on a changeup in college. He probably needs to add some velo to be like a high round pick, like an early pick. But he's a late day 1 or early day 2 guy for me that I find super interesting, that I think the Brewers would probably be pretty interested in. So this is, I will note, I'm done with my answer now, but this is the earliest I've really, really started digging in to the draft. And I'm very excited because I already have all these names and I'm normally not at this point, and it's going to make me even more psychotic when we get to the draft in July. So I'm very much looking forward to it.
Wait till the 2025 draft special. I mean, the 2024 one, I thought that was already pretty extensive, but I think we're entering a whole new stratosphere here moving forward. So
that's right.
Should be fun to follow. I'm not like as all in on it as you are, but it is still fun to at least look into it and kind of try to project some of these guys. Because I do like player development. It's just it takes a lot of effort to really go deep into that stuff, especially when you are not someone who works in player development and it's not your job necessarily to look into these guys. But I do admire you for being able to do that for so many college players. I wouldn't be able to handle it. So McNam003 asks, my favorite sports offseason is baseball, and that's without a draft. MLB wants to increase interest in the draft. Do you think they would ever consider an off-season draft? Or would owners not want to lose the partial season of development?
Yeah, so it's a good question because that is always like a big part of the NBA and the NFL offseason. Like people gravitate towards the draft. It's kind of a way to get back into the sport when it's off. The problem is those sports are naturally off during summer, which is when all of these kids come out of high school and they leave college. And it's an easy way to move into their next chapter. In baseball, that's why it has to be in summer, really, is that you can't have college kids graduate and sit there for 6 months because teams aren't going to know what's happening with them, or they're going to have to form all these extra, post-college leagues to make sure they can keep an eye on these guys. And you don't want a guy who just gets completely out of shape over 6 months and now all of a sudden you want to draft him in the second round, but you haven't seen him play or whatever. And then for high school guys, they're deciding if they want to go to college or not. So they have to know by really the August deadline is on purpose, is because the colleges need to know who's coming in and the players need to know if they're going to college or if they're signing. So I don't think they could ever do it. I do think it would be better in terms of ratings. I bet more people would be interested in it if it was, like I said, I mean, the Rule 5 draft gets a little bit of attention at the end of the winter meetings, but imagine if that was what ended the winter meetings. Like it would get a lot of attention. It just isn't feasible with how everything has to work in terms of timing. It just wouldn't work out. So, yeah, I hadn't ever thought about it. My first thought was like, oh yeah, that would be fun. And then as soon as I was like, yeah, but school, these guys are student athletes for the most part. So they do have to worry about that portion of things.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too. It just wouldn't work out because really the you would have to essentially you're pushing everything back.
Yeah.
Because you can't push it forward. You can't do it before these guys are playing their last college seasons. But if you push it back, now there's this weird dead period of time where not only is there not really any development happening, these guys kind of have to put a pause on what their futures look like and what their future plans look like. That's just not very viable. The one thing I will say is it does need to be in the summer, but can we find a different week in the summer and not do it as the All-Star game is going on and we have all that unfolding? I really think that's just bad for bringing publicity to the draft because you're kind of burying it under all this other stuff. So I think that's something that Major League Baseball could do a better job at.
Yes.
But it is going to have to still be in the summer. I don't think there's really any way to work around that or do it in a way that makes sense for all parties. But still an interesting question because you're right. I think that it would be a fun way to spruce up the offseason a little bit. But it's just not something that is probably going to be able to work for everybody who is involved in the draft. Last question we'll take this week before we wrap up comes from Tyler. I like this one because I think this is kind of a fun debate. Would you still consider Christian Yelich a top 100 player in baseball going into this season? I'm inclined to say, and I'll get into my rationale. I'm inclined to say I think he's probably in the bottom third of the list, but I do think he's in that list. I think number one, top 100, that's always going to be such a deep list that I don't think the bar to get in is quite as high as people might assume. So I think Yelich is in pretty comfortably. But when I'm looking at a list like this, it's always going to be different depending on who you talk to, what their criteria is, how they evaluate these guys. My tenets that I would try to stick to here for me personally is number one, look at a multiple season sample size if possible. I think the only cases where you can't do that is if you have a rookie who played really well. But otherwise, let's try to go off of multiple years of data and also try to figure out what the aging curve probably looks like for that guy because you're also trying to project it forward too a little bit. That's also debate as well, though. Like, are you talking top 100 right now as in looking back at the season that just unfolded or the current season, or are you looking ahead to 2025, 2026 and beyond? But get multiple seasons, look at that at the same time if you're able to for as many players as possible. And then number two is I do think health matters. You can be a top 100 talent, but to me, when I hear top 100 player, I'm thinking of like production, on-field production. Your production is naturally going to be limited if you're not on the field very often. And that is, I think that's what really bumps Yelich down is the fact that he only played in 73 games in 2024. He played in 144 in 2023, which is, I think, that missed a little bit of time, but still nothing crazy. But you look at what he's done over the last couple of years. So 2022, I'm just for the sake of simplicity and answering this quickly, I'm going to go off of Baseball Reference WAR. 2022, 2.5 wins above replacement in 154 games. And again, I think that's where, like we talked about, how 100 players, that is pretty deep. So the bar to get on that list isn't quite as high as I think some people would think. But then you go to 2023, 3.6 wins above replacement in 144 games. 2024, he was already over 2 wins at 73 games in. And again, made the All-Star team. I don't really care about accolades a whole lot, though. So we'll kind of overlook that. But you look at what he's done over his career, the career numbers are still very good. This is a guy who's a career 130 OPS plus guy. He was really good in 2023. Probably had a case to be an all-star in 2023. I know he didn't get that honor, which again is why I don't like to talk about accolades a whole lot because, that gets a little dicey with voted on accolades and awards and distinctions. But basically, like, playing at an all-star level is probably the way to describe it in 2023. Playing at an all-star level again in 2024, but injured. Like I said, I think the injury knocks him down a little bit, but I'm still putting him in that top 100. It also kind of depends what your philosophy is surrounding pitchers too, because I'm not sure that we quite have a great understanding of pitcher value compared to hitter value. I think it's a lot easier to value position players or properly, or at least get close to properly valuing position players because they're out there every day. Ideally, they're playing 150 plus games, racking up over 600 plate appearances. A starting pitcher's job is way different. So I know we have wins above replacement for those guys as well, but I'm not sure we're quite as advanced or quite as fine-tuned in how we value those guys. So how many pitchers you put on your top 100 list also kind of weighs into this as well. But I would still consider him a top 100 player.
Yeah, I agree. I think if health is out of the equation, like you said, I don't think there's even a remote debate. He was posting a 910 OPS with a 153 WRC plus at the time of his injury last year. He had 21 steals, 11 homers. And it should be noted that he was actually playing through the back stuff for the majority of last season. He kept talking about how he would have like numbness in his legs and stuff, like, and he was still doing a lot of this stuff. So he was in a good spot. He was playing well. He had a really good 2023. For me, I don't think there's really any debate that he's in it, but I do agree with you. I think he's closer to like that bottom 2/3, bottom third of the top 100. And yeah, I could see, like, I don't think I could go higher than 50. I'm just doing that off the top of my head. I don't have 50 names or anything there, but like, I don't think I could go higher than 50. That's probably about where I could max out right now. If he gives a full season again next year, as even close to what he was doing for the half season last year, then I think he starts putting himself in, that maybe that top third conversation again, where he's close to the 30 mark. The defense, the lack of defense will always kind of hold him down a little bit. But he was legitimately one of the better hitters in baseball while he was healthy last year. And that's very valuable. It's just a matter of, you got to get another full season out of him. It is interesting looking back though, 154 and then 144 games. You mentioned the 144, but like he really had two pretty complete seasons prior to 2024. And I think people didn't really recognize that at the time, that he was able to be out there as much as he was. Everyone remembers the days that he would sit for back tightness and stuff like that, but he was out there a lot. And I actually thought last year, and I may have mentioned this, or it might have been 2023 even, I always had slight concerns that they weren't going the Ryan Braun route with him in terms of rest and just building it into his schedule. My guess is it's going to be part of his schedule going forward, that he's going to have more built-in days of rest where you're not playing. I don't care if you feel good. I don't care if you're hot. We're not playing you for 2 straight weeks. I remember in 2023 when he played, it was like 2.5 months in a row. It was like the best stretch of Brewers baseball in 2023, but he did not have a day off. And that was wild to me at the time. Who knows if the back may have just been in such a bad place that it was like, if it feels good enough, I'm going out there. But now that he's had the surgery, I think you have to build in these days of rest. And if you do it right, and if the back surgery obviously it's gone as planned so far, but the return goes as planned, the guy we had last season was a very, very good player. And obviously I'm in agreement with you. I don't really care when I look at Baseball Reference if they made a bunch of all-star games, but he was a legitimate starting all-star or all-star starter last year. Like there really wasn't a debate. He was the best outfielder in the NL almost. So at that point, it's pretty hard to take him off the top 100. It's just the health and everything else makes it hard to put him too much higher than, like I said, I don't think I could go in the top half for sure. And it's probably closer to like that 60, 70 mark right now.
I agree with you fully. Maybe I've said it before, maybe I haven't, but they absolutely need to go the Braun route with him for workload management. Like, just say we got to put some rules in place just to keep you healthy. Like, you're not going to play set number of games in a row. We're going to double up on off days if we can, like things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And it is intriguing for me to see if that will unfold under Pat Murphy, because I think Craig Counsell was always very firm with doing that. And that's where I'm giving Counsell credit here, because it's not easy to do when you have this personal relationship with these guys, especially the very competitive ones. First of all, they're Major League Baseball players. The vast majority of them are going to be very competitive, like more competitive than most of the population. But then the most competitive among that group, it's very hard to look at them and say, you feel like you can play today, but I'm not going to let you.
Yep.
And we saw Pat Murphy get talked into putting guys back into the lineup at points throughout the year with Willy Adames and William Contreras. So I am curious, because I do think, in my opinion, this is where Murphy should just kind of put his foot down. I think he needs to do it a lot more with William Contreras too next year. And I think based on the workload, I think he did start doing it a little bit down the stretch. Either that, or maybe William was starting to feel the effects of the workload more, and it was easier to take time off, because he did take more days off down the stretch. But
yeah,
Christian Yelich, I do think they are going to have to put their foot down with him and say, even if you feel great right now, we need you to stay healthy. We got to make sure the back injury doesn't crop up. You're getting up there in age a little bit for a baseball player. We need to take a step back and set some ground rules here so we can keep you healthy. And I know that's a tough thing to do, but I do think it is something that the Brewers are going to need to look into a little bit more. And I think it is something that could help him moving forward. With that, that brings us to the end of this week's episode. Thank you all for tuning in. This might be like one of my favorites that we've done in a while. And a lot of it was probably because we got to react to a pitching acquisition in real time as it was going down. I actually thought that was a lot of fun. I feel like people don't really get a chance to see real-time analysis like that. As something breaks, they just get to see, what somebody, whether it's us or somebody else, anyone covering the Brewers, that get to kind of hear their thoughts and see what they say after they've had a chance to sit down and develop them a little more and kind of fine-tune some things. But hopefully that was a kind of a preview for people of kind of what goes into breaking down a pitcher, breaking down an acquisition, or trying to think about it the way the Brewers might be thinking about it. Those are kind of just the stops we pull out, like as soon as that kind of news breaks. So it's kind of cool to get to share that with people. But thank you all for tuning in this week. We'll be back in a couple of weeks, sticking to our off-season release schedule, unless there's major news that breaks in the meantime. But until then, thank you all for listening, and go Brewers. Baseball's getting closer. We're almost there.